US president has reiterated his intention to sue the BBC over a documentary about the events of the Capitol Hill riots in 2021, saying he had an obligation to do so. In an interview with Fox News, Mr. Trump accused the BBC of defrauding the public. He said the Panorama program had butchered his speech, and he accused the BBC of dishonesty. Mr. Trump had previously threatened to sue the corporation for $1 billion. Correspondents say he has a reputation for making legal claims for eye-watering amounts of money, only to settle out of court. The Panorama program was broadcast on the 28th of October last year, meaning Mr. Trump has missed the one-year deadline for suing in London. His case would therefore more likely be held in Florida, where the statute of limitations is 2 years.
There is a fundamental difference between raising serious concerns over editorial failings and members of this House launching a sustained attack on the institution itself. Because the BBC is not just a broadcaster, it is a national institution that belongs to us all. Every day it tells the story of who we are, the people, places and communities that make up life across the UK. It projects British values, creativity and integrity to the world. It underpins our creative industries, has a footprint in our nations and regions that is unmatched by any other. And it is by far the most widely used and trusted source of news in the United Kingdom. As we write the next chapter of an institution that has stood at the centre of British public life for a century, our overarching goal is simple: to ensure the BBC can renew its mission for the modern age and continue to inform, educate and entertain, not just for the coming decade, but well into the next century.
It's something that should never have happened.
They need to get their organisation sorted so that in the future we can look at the BBC with confidence.
Well, for more on this, I'm joined now on the line from London by the author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Great to see you, Dr. Laskiewicz. Of course, the BBC chairman, Samir Shah, has already apologised for the splicing together of parts of a speech by President Trump on the 6th of January 2021 in a way that was suggesting he was explicitly urging people to attack the US Capitol. And 2 senior executives resigned at the weekend, but Mr. Trump says he has an obligation to file a defamation case against the BBC. So this isn't going away, is it?
No, it won't go away. And it's a godsend for Trump because, of course, if he can show that he is the wronged party here, the implication is that for the Epstein affair, he's the wronged party as well. So this will be an excellent cover for him if he goes ahead, which is what I presume he will do for precisely the reason I've stated.
That's a very interesting connection that you make there. Now, Mr. Trump's lawyers have written to the BBC claiming that the Panorama program had caused the president overwhelming financial and reputational harm, and asserting their client's intention to sue the BBC for no less than $1 billion if he didn't receive a retraction, an apology and compensation by this Friday. So the clock is ticking in that regard, isn't it? Do you think he's likely to carry out that threat? I suppose you do, because you just said so.
Yes, the question is how and when and so on. It's interesting because what he really needs is for the BBC to admit he was the wrong party formally. They've done so indirectly, of course. All the resignations point to this. So therefore, he's on a winner, as far as one can tell. And as for the sums involved, well, there are 2 aspects. First of all, a bigger sum always looks better and sounds good. But as you stated in your run-up, he often settles for less if a financial settlement is going to be actually on the cards. What is interesting for him is not so much the money he'll be paid, although this is an indication of how much damage he suffered, so I suppose he would be interested, but also the fact that he is seen to be not guilty after very profound accusations by a leading world renowned media station, which of course entirely corresponds to his constant narrative about fake news appearing everywhere.
And you talked about the money there. As we mentioned, Mr. Trump has a reputation for making legal claims for eye-watering amounts, including the $10 and $20 billion he sought from CBS News over the editing of an interview with Kamala Harris, only to settle out of court for significantly less. I think he settled for $16 million. So how possible is it for him to launch a lawsuit against the BBC from the United States? Because the Panorama program was broadcast on the 28th of October last year, meaning Mr. Trump has missed the one-year deadline for suing in London. So his case would therefore more likely be held in Florida, where the statute of limitations is 2 years.
Actually, for him, that's another godsend, because suing in Britain wouldn't be as likely to be successful as it is in the States, where they're used to this sort of thing and regard it as quite natural. In Great Britain, more often than not, all that happens is something, the program is retracted and that's that. So the suing is not actually in part of the English system. So therefore, suing in Florida, more on his home base, will be entirely good from his point of view. The $1 billion, which sounds grotesquely enormous for everybody outside the USA, is by no means in USA a large number anymore. There was that famous remark by a senator talking about spending, saying $1 billion here, $1 billion there, and soon you're talking about real money, stating in effect that $1 billion is simply just now a normal sum, like billionaires are normal. So therefore $1 billion is almost certainly what you'd be going for. What he settles for, well, that's actually not the point. The $1 billion grabs the headlines. He is shown to be exonerated. It's a success for him. The implication is that he's wronged elsewhere, and there's a lot of fake media news around. And so that's what really interests him. How much he gets at the end of the day, even if it's only a few $1 million, well, at least that's totally irrelevant as far as I can see, politically speaking, that is.
Absolutely. I understand, though, that if the case came to court, one key thing his lawyers would have to prove is that the documentary had been available to watch in the US, and they would also have to show that the president suffered significant financial harm as a result of the Panorama broadcast, in this case, $1 billion in losses.
Yeah, you're now switching from politics to the actual legality. There are indeed some problems, as you pointed out, in terms of the strict law. What you have to also notice that the resignations imply that there is a wrongdoing there, and so therefore the case will almost certainly go ahead, because prima facie there's something to be said for it if the BBC top people resign. Proving it, yes, I agree, it's far more difficult, and more likely than not he'll settle out of court. But as I say, what he really wants is the apology, because that would just put the icing on the cake, in politically speaking.
Absolutely. I will keep an eye on that one. But stay with us, Dr. Laskiewicz, because we'd like to get your take on this next story. Reports from Ukraine say the country's army has withdrawn from 5 settlements in the east of the country following massive Russian assaults. Earlier on Tuesday, there'd been reports that the Russian army had broken through a key section of Ukraine's defensive lines in the Zaporizhia region. More than 3 years since Russia launched its full-scale invasion, the Ukrainian military spokesman said the assaults by the Russian army and more than 400 artillery barrages per day meant that Ukrainian forces had to pull back from those areas in the east. And Dr. Laskiewicz is still with me on the line from London. Thank you very much indeed for staying with us. What more can you tell us about this changing military picture, particularly around the cities of Petrovsk and Zaporizhia?
There are 3 main points. First of all, it just shows you that in a war of attrition, the bigger country wins. This won't be the first such war. England so defeated, Holland so by attrition. And so this is what's happening here. Russia is moving forward, albeit at a huge cost, but then it's got the resources to, so to speak, fund such advances. 2, it still is going forward only slowly. This is a very important point also to note, because the Ukrainians aren't just handing over vast swathes of territory. So even though this is a victory for Russia, it's by no means the gigantic victory that President Putin no doubt hoped at the beginning of all this, when he thought he could take out Ukraine in one go, and probably could have done had he done it more competently. Number three, the key we're waiting for is whether he can make a breakthrough of something that grabs the headlines, a very major town as opposed to just settlements and villages. That's the one that would show that he is winning, and that his demand, which he stated to President Trump for those regions of Ukraine, is justified, and by victory here, he could carry on the war elsewhere, because being a dictator, there's no obvious reason for him to stop. What is interesting, though, you hear an awful lot about how Russia is losing, and once again, Russia is actually going forwards, as would appear to be the case quite clearly now. And so therefore, the problem of the possibility of World War III has not gone away.
Well, I was going to talk to you a little bit about that moving forward, and to ask you how much this latest Russian push supports Moscow's claim that all this talk of a stalemate on the front lines is wrong, and that Russia is making gains.
Quite so. A very important point. It's very important for a dictator, which was in effect what President Putin is, to have victories. If he loses, and the same thing is about stalemate, incidentally, because he's not winning, he's, so to speak, not equally succeeding, obviously, and he is now succeeding. And if he's succeeding, as is the case, he may feel emboldened to strike elsewhere. Obviously, the Suwalki Gap is the one in question, where a link up there would be very desirable. And this would follow a victory here. There is no stalemate at present, and nor will President Putin, as a result, moderate his demands for all the Ukrainian territory he sought when he met President Trump.
How does all this play into the broader diplomatic picture around Ukraine's efforts to get more support for its attempts to repel Russia, and all the diplomatic pressure to end this war? I mean, is Ukraine now being left to essentially fight it out?
Yes, essentially, Ukraine can still make use of American intelligence, as far as one can tell, which is almost essential, the key. And it has arms still from the West. But there's no question about the fact that it would appear to be less well supported, in particular by USA. Please note the whole business of sanctions, which President Donald Trump announced just shortly, has been, of course, muted recently. And it's more than likely that if Ukraine loses again, that it will come under pressure to find some sort of deal with Russia, at least from the American side. Europe is not keen, but then Europe isn't actually supplying a great deal of the goods that Ukraine wants, which is why the Russians are moving forwards. So therefore, the key is, can Russia continue on this momentum, and then how far it can get?
Mr. Laskiewicz, thank you very much indeed for your analysis of those two very big stories. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the author and international affairs analyst. He was talking to me on the line there from London.